So today in Writer's Workshop, we've been talking about how we revise our informational pieces with geography. So with that in mind, we're going to be talking about this. It's something that you could have used in the Revolutionary War essay last week. It's something that you should be doing in your COVID-19 articles that you're writing this week. So your teaching point today is that when you write and revise as a historian, it is important to keep in mind not only qualities of good writing, but also qualities of good history. Historians know that geography has an impact on what occurs. So when we think about that, and there are places where that's really obvious. There are countries that are landlocked on an island, and so anytime there's been a war that they've been involved in, it's been harder for someone to attack them until the invention of the airplane. There have also been places where being on the water and having a port has really impacted history. But let's think about that in terms of our American Revolution essays that we wrote last week. So these are the notes that we made in Writer's Workshop last week, where we added more detail from our articles and found a pattern across articles. And once we added all that evidence, I realized that my one paragraph had really become two paragraphs. So I've broken it apart into two paragraphs, because the first one is really talking about what it was like to have the army that came and went every 3 months. And the second one is really talking about how hard it was for the army to not have a lot of resources. So when I'm thinking about where geography might have played into this, if I look at this map of the American Revolution and all of the different battles, I notice that up at the top in the north is where all of the earlier battles were. A lot of battles in 1775 up to 1777. It wasn't until the late 1770s and even into the 1780s, because this war was so long, that it got into the South. So when I look specifically for Valley Forge, which one of my articles was about, I see that it's in Pennsylvania, and I know that in that area, because of the geography, the climate is really, really cold, especially in the wintertime. And Valley Forge, they were there in the winter and had that battle. So I know that that's going to affect things, that it's so cold. I also see how spread out the country already was. So if someone is going home every 3 months, and you think about the fact that they maybe or maybe didn't have a horse, which was the fastest way to travel, they were probably walking on foot, that becomes a really big problem. So I'm going to think about how I can now add that in to my paragraphs here. And when I do that, I've added already. So take a minute to see if you can see where I've added into each of these paragraphs how geography impacted things. So you may have noticed that it was difficult because the country was so spread out. That's something that I've added to show how geography impacted things. And in the second part, I've added the area in which they were fighting is likely to have had very harsh winters because it's in the northeast of America. So this was a real problem to stay healthy. And I've added that after the comments about shoes or coats. So this has made my essay even stronger. So when we think about that for our COVID articles, this morning we talked with some of your classmates about how geography impacts people's experience with COVID-19. And some of the examples we came up with were that cities make it harder to avoid being near other people. Cities make it easier to get help from others if you need to stay inside. Some countries are more impacted because they have a lot of travel in and out. And we actually added a lot of other ideas. So if you want to see your classmates' ideas and maybe add to them, you can go to this collaboration board. You'll see the link here. I'll also post it with the video. And when we go there to see what people have added, we shared some people's essays this morning. So those are still on my screen, but we're really strong. When we come to this discussion board of what people have added, and you might be able to add as well, it's going to invite you to join your session. And you can see all of these different ideas. Someone made a really good point that this really impacted some people who have to travel for work, and they can't do that. And that particularly impacted that people in Europe often work in another country, so they really can't get to work. Also, that people who are in more rural areas have a harder time finding supplies because there might be something more local, but people in more rural areas, it's easier to exercise. People in cities, it's harder to exercise because it's harder to find a place where you can be alone. So you don't have as much personal space in more congested areas. You may or may not have options for drive-through food so that it's easier to get some food that you don't have to prepare at home. So it really makes some differences based upon the different people who we've interviewed. So far in this unit for Writers Workshop, we've talked about a couple of different things. We've talked about how when you're planning an informational piece, you really have to think about the topic and the parts of the topic to write about. We talked about how it's important to take time to plan your writing. We talked about how it's important to research and take notes, as you've done with your interviews for COVID, as well as with the articles that you read. And then you want to draft. And after you draft, you're not done. You really have to revise with lots of different lenses. Last week, we talked about growing ideas and looking for patterns, asking how things might be different. And today we talked about thinking about how the geography of a place impacted how the events unfolded. Hopefully, you're continuing to use this to grow your writing. Thank you.